Hello guys and welcome back. So in this video I wanted to talk about the light interaction between these elements, which is something rather complex and can be very expensive to compute. And what we have here, we have two relations. We have the lights in the scene and we have the light from the explosion. Okay? The light from the scene can illuminate the explosion, the volumetrics. They can also contribute to the volume indirect, the scattering of the volume, okay, which is something very heavy. Then we have the explosion emitting light that will be reflected and cause diffuse illumination. Okay, so as the explosion expands, you can see here there's a illumination from it, and it's also getting reflected on the ground. So that's another source of light. And the relation between these guys is can be very expensive if you want to have all the lights affect the explosion and the explosion affecting everything else. And the best approach to create the most efficient render is to separate them in separate passes. So what I've done is, let me write this down. Okay. So what we have fire illumination to cause fire to illuminate the scene. Okay, one thing. We have another thing, fire to be reflected on the ground. Reflection and diffuse are not the same thing on the ground. 3, we have lights to illuminate the volume, and we have lights to be to illuminate the scene. Okay, and these will cause a specular and diffuse component, and the best way is to split it like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a separate pass where the fire is illuminating the scene, and this is going to be we're going to merge the reflection and the diffuse. So we're going to have the diffuse bounds set to 1 and the specular depth set to 1. So we get reflection and diffuse illumination. This will not contain any light. Now why is that? Because sampling getting diffuse illumination to clean up perfectly and to be reflected as well will require a lot of samples, and you don't need those samples for all the lights. These lights, we can easily clear them up with, let's say, 4 or 5 samples max. This guy will probably be needing 12 for diffuse and maybe 6 for specular. So it doesn't make sense to apply those settings to all the lights. So we're going to do a separate pass and try to clean up the diffuse and the specular reflection of the explosion. Then we're going to have all the lights affect the scene and affect the explosion at the same time. But if we do this, we're going to have GI on, we're going to have reflection on and everything. If we do this, we cannot have volume scattering on, because if we do that, it's going to be very expensive for all the lights. We cannot have fire as well in the scene, because we already computed the reflection of the fire in a separate pass. So if we have reflection of the lights and of this, we cannot double the reflection of the fire. So we need a new volume shader that doesn't have fire. Okay, so we need another copy of the volume that doesn't have fire on it, just volume raw. Then we have a separate pass for the fog, where basically we don't need any illumination except the lights to affect the fog. And this fog is actually a VDB volume. It's exactly the same type as this. Okay, it's a VDB volume, and it's being illuminated by all these lights. And this is something very new in Arnold 5, where you can have lights inside the volume. As long as it's not very, very dense, you can easily produce a very clean result. And all this scattering that you see here is actually from the volumes. You can see there's a volume fog here coming, and that's all within the scene, all these guys as well. Okay, so let's take a look at the lights, and hopefully when I show you guys the passes, it will become more clear. And let's take a look here. So I have the tanks, and I took one of the tanks and added lights to it, and then exported the geo. You cannot embed, I believe, yeah, you cannot instance light in Arnold. So if you have an Arnold procedural that contains light, you cannot instance that. So what I've done is I instanced the geo, and then for each light, I copied each light per tank. So let me show, for example, one here. I don't have the geo preview, but let's say this tank, for example, there is 2 lights parented to it. So for each one, I copy and parent the lights to it, and this is just spotlights. There's nothing fancy to that. I think I did some variation as well, maybe not. Yeah, so these are just point lights that I copy. Then I started looking through the scene, and basically where there is interesting details, I would place a light. So for example, I have this cavity here, I would place 2 lights or 3 lights just to get some gradients, some fall-offs with the scene. So there's lights here in the stairs where there is cavity, where there is any intricate details that I could place a light on. Actually, not everything, but I tried to do my best to make it a bit more interesting. So I have a light here, for example, that shines down. I have another one here just to illuminate this area. These guys, nothing here. These are spotlights projecting radial lights, so it's a spotlight basically. And have point lights. Point lights here is whenever there is interesting or intricate details, I would place a light. There is nothing, there's no rule to it, to be honest. You can spend time and just look through the scene and create something similar. And this one is actually, this light here is to create some kind of gradient here. So when I look at it from the top, I can see some nice gradient. And this is the approach for everything. It's whenever there is details, I want them to pop out, and I want them to be visible. So this section here, I have area lights, and then I change them on the other side. Okay, let's continue. This section here, there is a room with lights. I put a light inside, and with indirect illumination you could create some interesting details. This guy on the back here, I put down an area light shooting upward, and to create just a gradient, so this section gets illuminated more than the top. I placed a light at the top to create some nice fade off. And let's see, and then all these, they have also individual lights. Like this projector have a light. These are just here. I wasn't sure, I wanted to create some interesting details as well and make them visible. Let's see, this is the same light as the other one. I guess I changed it. One time is on the front, one time is on the back. And that's another tank. I have 2 lights here. And it's just going through the scene really and placing some lights. There is nothing, there is no rule to this. You just find the interesting details and place a light. These 2 lights I placed on purpose so that when I when I look through this shot, I can have some backlights and some side lights to cast shadows and volumetrics. And these are some more lights as well. I wanted to illuminate the section here, so I use these two lights to illuminate the full set. And let's take a look at this again. And then tweaking these lights is really an artistic thing. There's no rule again to it. I look at the scene. I still have a lot of things that I like to change, but for example, these lights are not very this light, for example, is not very visible. This is too saturated. I think I should reduce that. This is just to eliminate this spot here, so this section is visible. I have these lights that create these spots here. They're super bright. These lights are very bright, the main ones, and the lights at the top are the brightest as well. Everything else is just to show some details in the station. They don't have a real purpose. Okay, cool. So let's see. So now for the passes, I'm going to show you guys some passes. So this is how I split it. It's not showing with a LUT, but I think it's fine. So this is the main pass. As you can see, I have the volume. It doesn't have any fire because I don't want that to be reflected, because we have reflection here. Okay, we have reflection on, so if we had fire, it will be reflected. But we're going to be doing that in a separate pass. And the samples to clean up the reflection of the lights is not the same that we need to clean up the reflection of the fire. So I made a separate volume that has fire set to off, simply. It's a copy. After I tweaked it, I made a copy and set the temperature to 0. That's it. Okay, so this has the VDB volume as well, which we're going to take a look at in a separate video. And I rendered everything. There is no volume scattering. These lights are not contributing to any scattering of the volume. It's just direct illumination, which is super fast to render. And let's play through it. Actually, I want to load this with a LUT. So let's see if I can do this. Okay, it's here. So this is the raw render. Okay, and let me show the video. Okay, so let's pick a frame. Cool. So this is the beauty pass, and this is the final version. You can see we have extra fire reflection, we have the fire illumination, and we have the fire look as well. Here you can see it's not very different. I haven't done anything crazy in comp, just a little bit of color correction, just a tiny bit of color correction and some glows to accentuate this a bit. And you can see it's very close to the render. I added chroma aberration to make it look, to add this shifting between the red, green, and blue. And I think that's pretty much it. I will show you the other passes and it will become more clear. So this is the main pass. Then we have the fire illumination. So this is the reflection of the fire and the diffuse, the fire illuminating any diffuse surfaces. So both of them together. And you can see the volume here is set to matte. I don't have the actual volume itself, and I will explain. Actually, I can explain it now. So this pass the volume is being reflected and it's illuminating the scene, but it does not have any volume scattering. And the reason for that is because I don't need it. It's much faster to reflect and illuminate volume from something that doesn't have volume scattering in it, because that's going to overcomplicate things. And so this pass does not have any volume scattering on it. And then if that's off, then I don't need this beauty pass. So the volume itself is set to matte, and it's not visible at all. And then I have to tweak the shader settings to the render settings to just give me an okay pass. It doesn't have to be super clean, because with everything else it's not going to be very visible. Okay, so this is the second pass. And then let's see. And then the fire beauty. We have the fire diffuse here, the direct diffuse. In this pass we don't need anything else. And then we have this guy, which is the main fire pass. And I'm gonna use cops to overlay all these passes together to show you guys how combined they can they produce the final image. So let me go to the image context, and let's put down a file node. And all these tricks are really more to save render time rather than getting something that we couldn't get in a single pass. Everything can be, we can render all of this in one pass, but we just have to increase the render settings to something really high to solve all the various noises from the various elements, which is very different based on what we're rendering. So fire beauty, we got that. You need fire illumination. And let's switch to the composite view, change this to 1 by 1. I'm just going to do A over B, so there's nothing fancy here. Let's copy this, and let's import the beauty pass. Okay, let's put down a layer node. Let's add the reflection onto the environment. Let's change the mode to add. Okay, we can see now we have reflection, without, with, and we have illumination as well. I can add a bright node and increase it if we want more. And then I'm gonna add the fire. This is also plus, because this pass contains only the fire illuminating the volume itself, and this information is not anywhere else. So all of this together, this is the final pass. And with the volume, with this fog and everything embedded, there is nothing different. And let me show the final one. It's very close to the final result, except a tiny bit of color correction, and you can see everything is pretty much the same. Cool. So I hope this makes sense. And let's take a look at the passes themselves and review a few more things. So let's see what this is. So I'm going to take a look at that lighting one and see what's it doing. Cool. So this is basically the diffuse light, and you can see the volume here doesn't have fire, and we have I don't have any fire, but the diffuse, we can increase that. I turned the GI off in the final render because it was expensive to render with them, but if I had more time I would definitely render it with reflection. You can see here we're getting some very cool reflection and diffuse as well. So this is the main pass. The fire pass contains the explosion with fire look on it. It excluded the VDB volume. I don't need that in the pass. And then we have the environment, the entire environment, as a matte. So let's take a look at the fire pass. And for this guy, we have diffuse only. Actually, we don't need the diffuse. Yeah, we can set this to off, and these two are off. So we're only calculating the fire pass, which is the fire of the explosion. Okay, the next thing is the fire illumination. So fire illum. And this one, we're reflecting the explosion, and we're also computing the volume illumination, not just the reflection. And I have a separate, sorry, not a separate, but I'm setting the volume depth to 1, so there is no scattering. This guy has volume scattering set to 3 because we need the fire to go through the volume. For this pass, we can just reflect it without any volume scattering, and it's going to be much faster because these guys, they don't have to trace through the volume. And then we have the main beauty, which I showed. So let's take a look at that again. So this is the main beauty. Cool. The next video, we're going to take a look at this fog here and how I created it, and then we're going to take a look at the volume shader for the explosion and the various versions of it. And I think that's pretty much it. Thank you guys for watching, and see you in a bit.